Before we dive into this creepy tale, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel and the algorithm. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin the story. The moorland vanishing. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of damp earth as Matt tightened his jacket against the evening chill. Living in the countryside had been a refreshing change from his old life in the city, though he was still getting used to the vast emptiness that stretched for miles around. The rolling moors of Black Hollow were a world apart from the hustle and congestion of urban life. Here, the sky stretched endlessly above. The wind whispered secrets through the trees, and time seemed slower, heavier. Tonight, he had decided to make the 3 to 4 mile trek to the Hollow Stag, a small, weathered tavern perched atop the lonely moors. It was a place known only to locals, a pub of stories, strong ale, and an eerie sense of history. His route took him through winding hillsides, past the skeletal remains of dry stone walls long abandoned, and deeper into the ancient woodlands that bordered the village. The path was barely trodden, more of a suggestion than a trail, and the air grew still as the last light of day bled out behind the hills. The occasional rustle in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl, and the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots accompanied him as he pressed on. He glanced up as a crow cawed, taking off from a twisted, blackened tree. A shiver ran down his spine, though he wasn't sure why. The quiet out here could be peaceful, but tonight there was an undercurrent of something else, something he couldn't quite place. By the time he arrived at the Hollow Stag, the sky had deepened into inky blue, the first hints of stars peeking through. The pub was just as he imagined, a squat, stone-built tavern with a thick oak door and a chimney spitting smoke into the cold night. Pushing open the heavy door, he was greeted by the welcoming warmth of a roaring fire and the low murmur of conversation. The scent of ale, wood smoke, and something faintly musty filled the air. A few heads turned as he stepped inside, but they soon returned to their drinks. Matt settled into a seat by the fire, stretching his hands toward the flames. The heat soaked into his chilled fingers, and he sighed in relief. A few locals sat scattered around, engaged in quiet conversation. The bar, lined with dark wooden stools, was manned by a stout, gray-haired landlord who gave him a nod as he placed his order. A pint of dark ale was set before him, and he took a long, satisfying sip. Across from him, an old man sat in a deep armchair, pipe smoke curling around his weathered face. He was dressed in traditional country gear, tweed jacket, flat cap, and heavy boots. The man watched Matt for a while before finally speaking. "New around here, aren't you?" His voice was rough, like gravel grinding underfoot. Matt nodded. "Moved in a few months back. Figured I'd come out and see the local spots." The old man took a slow drag from his pipe before exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "Good spot this, but the moors, they have their own ways." Matt raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" The man leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "Folks have gone missing in these parts, wander off the path, never seen again. Some say the land takes them. Others, well, they reckon it's something worse." Matt chuckled nervously. "Like what?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the bar where 2 men sat in the far corner, half shrouded in shadow. Their conversation was quiet, but Matt could feel their eyes on him. Their expressions were unreadable, their presence unsettling. "Strangers don't always get a warm welcome round here," the old man muttered. "Best be careful." Matt shrugged it off, finishing his drink. The fire crackled beside him, the warmth making him drowsy. He didn't think much of the 2 men, not until later. By midnight, Matt was unsteady on his feet. He'd had 1 pint too many, but wasn't too concerned about the long walk back. The old man had offered him a lift, but Matt refused. The last thing he wanted was to be a burden. As he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him like a wave, sharpening his senses. The pub door creaked shut behind him, and he set off down the moorland path, the full moon bathing the land in pale silver light. The walk was peaceful at first, the distant hoot of an owl the only sound accompanying him. Then he saw it, a pair of headlights on the road ahead, a lone vehicle creeping along at an unnatural pace. Matt frowned. It was the first car he'd seen all night. Probably just hunters, he reasoned, searching for game. But as he walked, he noticed the headlights didn't move on. Instead, a massive hunting lamp flickered to life atop the vehicle, sweeping the landscape. Then the light found him. It hovered for a moment before passing on, only to return. Matt's heart thudded. He kept walking, forcing himself not to panic. The vehicle hesitated, then turned, driving away down the road. A wave of relief washed over him. Until he heard it, the metallic clang of a gate being unlatched. The vehicle wasn't leaving. It was coming for him. Matt's breath hitched in his throat as the sound of the metal gate slamming shut echoed through the night. His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was just farmers, maybe hunters, but deep down, he knew better. The headlights swung toward him as the engine roared to life. The vehicle's tires tore across the field, sending mud and grass flying. Matt bolted, his legs burning as he sprinted toward the nearest cover. The moors offered little in the way of shelter, just uneven ground and the occasional dry stone wall. He ran blindly, the sound of the engine growing louder behind him. His breath came in ragged gasps as he vaulted over a low wall, landing hard on the other side. He rolled onto his knees, scrambling forward. The headlights loomed behind him, bouncing erratically as the vehicle pursued him across the field. The laughter carried over the wind, a horrible, mocking sound. Matt spotted a break in the terrain, a dip leading to a thick cluster of trees. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning as he charged forward. The engine revved again, but then, suddenly, the headlights swerved away. They weren't following him anymore. They were trying to cut him off. Matt hurled himself over a second wall, landing heavily on damp earth. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the sharp sting in his ankle, and darted into the trees. The undergrowth was thick, clawing at his clothing as he forced his way through. His breathing was erratic, but he couldn't afford to stop. Behind him, the vehicle ground to a halt. Doors slammed. Footsteps crunched through the undergrowth. "They always run," one of the men sneered. His voice was thick with amusement. "Doesn't make a difference." Matt ducked low, pressing himself against the rough bark of a tree. He swallowed hard, willing his pounding heart to quiet. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. They were enjoying this. A shotgun cocked. Matt clenched his jaw to keep himself from making a sound. The men moved closer, sweeping a flashlight across the trees. "I swear he went this way." "He's close. Can smell the fear." Matt clenched his fists. He had to move. Carefully, he inched around the tree, using the cover of darkness to his advantage. The wind rustled the branches above, masking the slight sound of his footfalls. He had to get higher. His gaze darted to an enormous oak a few feet ahead. It was his only option. He crept toward it, every nerve in his body on edge. The laughter had stopped. That was worse. Now, it was only silence. He reached the tree and scrambled up the trunk, his hands grasping for the first sturdy branch. The bark scraped his palms as he climbed higher, his muscles screaming in protest. He pulled himself onto a thick limb and pressed his back against the trunk. The footsteps stopped directly beneath him. Matt forced himself to stay still, his breath shallow. He could hear them below, shifting, waiting. He's got to be close. Maybe he's up in one of these trees. A long silence. Then, a twig snapped. Matt's stomach twisted into knots. He squeezed his eyes shut as he heard one of them sigh dramatically. "Nah, if he climbed, we'd have heard him." The second man exhaled through his nose. "Still, he can't be far." Minutes stretched into eternity. The cold night air bit at his skin, but he didn't dare move. The men stood beneath the tree for what felt like hours. Matt's legs were beginning to cramp, his arms trembling from exertion. But he stayed put, unmoving. Then, "Forget it," one of them said. "We'll find him another time." A beat of hesitation, then footsteps retreating, a car door opening, the engine roaring to life. Matt remained in the tree, barely daring to breathe. He listened as the vehicle tore away across the moors, the sound gradually fading into the distance. He didn't move, not for another hour. When Matt finally descended from the tree, his entire body was stiff. He landed awkwardly, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. His mind was fogged with adrenaline and fear, but he forced himself to move. He walked briskly at first, then faster. Every sound in the woods made his skin crawl. His pulse pounded in his ears, his paranoia at its peak. He had no idea if they were truly gone, or just waiting. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, he finally saw the village in the distance. A sense of relief washed over him, but he remained on edge. He was being watched. He could feel it. The moment he reached the first houses, he hurried to the village shop. A few locals were outside chatting casually, their lives untouched by the horrors of the night. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A muddy Land Rover crawling through the street. The two men inside locked eyes with him. Their expressions were unreadable, but there was something almost amused in the way they stared at him. A slow, knowing smirk curled one of their lips. Matt's stomach lurched. He bolted into the shop, breathless, desperate to explain everything. But as he told his story, the old woman behind the counter barely reacted. She just shook her head, tutting softly. "Oh, they were just huntin'," she said dismissively. "Wouldn't hurt a soul." Matt knew better. He left the shop quickly, his mind reeling. He barely made it home before locking the door behind him. He didn't sleep that night. He typed everything into his computer, documenting every moment. 6 months later, Matt was missing. The men had been questioned, but without proof, they walked free. The Moors had claimed another. Thank you for watching. But before you go, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps the channel and ensures you never miss another chilling story, because some stories aren't just stories.